For most Americans, a cup of coffee isn't just a habit, it's survival fuel. Every single day, the US consumes between 450 and 560 million cups, and nearly 1/3 of that supply comes from Brazil, the world's coffee giant. For decades, Brazilian beans entered the US duty-free, anchoring supermarket shelves and fueling the $343 billion coffee economy that supports 2.2 million American jobs. But that lifeline has just been shaken to its core. In his second term, President Donald Trump imposed a 50% tariff on Brazilian coffee, a move that blindsided importers and rattled consumers already anxious about rising grocery prices. A 50-pound bag that once cost $147 now lands at nearly $360. Analysts project retail coffee prices will climb 15 to 20% in the coming months, pushing a 16 pounds into the mid-20s. For the average consumer, that means every cup could jump another 20 to 25 cents. A small change on paper, but multiplied across hundreds of millions of daily cups, it's a shockwave. The impact ripples through the entire supply chain. Importers calculate losses in the billions, roasters are scrambling to renegotiate contracts, and cafés, already pressured by inflation, face tough choices: raise prices or shrink portions. Consumers may switch brands or blends, but few Americans will simply give up coffee. Demand is inelastic, which makes the tariff shock even more severe. Brazil exported over $1.9 billion in coffee to the US in 2024 alone, over 8 million 60-kilogram bags. Cutting that flow threatens not only trade balances, but also jobs across hospitality, retail, and logistics. And it's not just Brazil in Trump's crosshairs. Switzerland, a major supplier of roasted coffee, now faces higher tariffs as well. With two leading exporters hit at once, the US market risks a double blow: runaway price inflation and looming shortages. The bigger question is geopolitical. If Brazil diverts its beans to Canada instead, will Washington's tariff war hand Ottawa the leverage to become North America's new coffee hub? By mid-2025, the consequences of Trump's coffee tariffs were no longer projections. They were reality. Consumer prices for roasted coffee had already risen by 15% compared to a year earlier, and industry estimates suggested another sharp increase was on the horizon. For companies on the ground, the math was punishing. Importers who once paid under $150 for a bag of beans were now facing invoices more than double that. Roasters warned that every additional cent per pound rippled outward, threatening cafes, restaurants, and ultimately, consumers. The sheer scale of America's coffee habit makes the stakes enormous. According to the National Coffee Association, the industry contributes over $343 billion annually to the US economy. From the farm-to-cup logistics chain to the bustling coffee shop on Main Street, millions of jobs depend on affordable imports. With Brazilian supply worth $1.9 billion in 2024, now squeezed by tariffs, the entire employment ecosystem stands at risk. And this is no ordinary commodity shock. Coffee is deeply cultural, tied to routine, productivity, and even identity. Analysts note that while consumers may switch to cheaper blends, cut back on premium purchases, or experiment with substitutes, demand remains stubbornly steady. The result? Inflation that sticks. Unlike discretionary spending categories, coffee inflation doesn't just vanish with time. It reshapes household budgets and business models. Globally, the tariff has triggered alarm. Brazil, blindsided by Washington's sudden 50% barrier, has begun diversifying its export markets. Early trade data shows a 25% surge in coffee shipments to Canada in the first half of 2025, setting records. Ottawa, which maintains zero tariffs on Brazilian coffee, has quickly positioned itself as a safe harbor for exporters. For Brazil, the calculation is simple. If America slams the door, Canada opens it. For Washington, the implications are chilling. If trade flows lock into Canadian supply chains, US buyers could permanently lose priority status. Contracts once shifted are not easily reversed, Even a 10% contraction in the US coffee industry represents tens of billions in lost value across jobs, retail, and hospitality. The unintended consequence of Trump's tariff, a historic opportunity for Canada to rise as North America's new coffee hub. The tariff shock reveals a larger truth about Trump's trade strategy. It relies on brute force while overlooking structural realities. Coffee is not steel, aluminum, or autos. It is not a product America can replicate domestically at scale. Despite experimental farms in Hawaii, California, and Puerto Rico, U.S. production accounts for just 1% of national consumption. A few thousand acres in specialty regions cannot fill the gap left by millions of Brazilian bags. That imbalance gives Brazil extraordinary leverage. And now, with tariffs biting, Brasilia is exercising that leverage in ways that tilt the regional balance. By sending more beans northward, Brazil is strengthening its ties to Canada, which is not just passively accepting imports, but actively marketing itself as a reliable partner in global supply chains. Ottawa knows that every shipment diverted to Canadian ports means fewer options for U.S. importers and greater long-term bargaining power for Canada in North American trade. Meanwhile, American companies are caught in the crossfire. Starbucks, Dunkin', and thousands of independent cafés are recalculating menu strategies. Some chains are quietly raising prices by 10 to 15 cents per cup. Others are shrinking serving sizes. Hospitality groups warn that the shock will filter into restaurants, hotels, and catering, sectors where coffee is not just a beverage, but a staple of service. For consumers, the result is simple: higher bills at every level of daily life. The morning cup becomes a political battlefield, and as anger spreads, it feeds into broader frustrations over food inflation and rising household costs. A recent Pew survey shows nearly 70% of Americans blame tariffs directly for rising prices in groceries and consumer goods. In Canada, however, the narrative is very different. Brazilian coffee arrives tariff-free, keeping shelves stocked and prices relatively stable. Ottawa's bet is that this stability will not only please Canadian consumers, but also send a powerful diplomatic message. While Washington weaponizes tariffs, Canada offers reliability. In a North America defined by volatility, that difference is becoming Canada's strongest card. But tariffs on coffee are just one chapter in a broader story. Trump's second term has revived an obsession with Greenland, echoing his headline-grabbing 2019 suggestion of buying the island. This time, the fixation isn't real estate humor, it's resource strategy. Greenland's deposits of rare earths, molybdenum, and critical minerals represent billions in untapped wealth. For the US, locked in a technological rivalry with China, those resources could be decisive. In June 2025, Greenland granted a 30-year permit for an EU-backed mining project extracting molybdenum, an essential alloy for defense, aerospace, and clean energy. Meanwhile, Australian firms have poured over $150 million into mapping Tanbreez, one of the world's largest rare earth deposits. Yet the challenges remain formidable: no roads, no ports, and brutal Arctic weather. Still, the interest from Washington is intense. Trump frames Greenland as vital to U.S. national security, both as a resource frontier and as a strategic outpost between Russia, China, and North America. But America is not alone in this race. Canada, the EU, and Greenland itself are aligning on multilateral terms, aiming to prevent dependence on any single partner. Ottawa has tied its own mining projects, like the Malmberg deposit, into a coordinated supply chain strategy with Brussels and Nuuk. The logic is clear. Together, they can secure Western access to critical minerals while resisting U.S. heavy-handed tactics. Here lies the parallel with coffee. Tariffs and pressure may deliver short-term headlines, but they are pushing allies into alternative coalitions. In both agriculture and mining, Canada is emerging as a stabilizing anchor. Whether it's beans from Brazil or rare earths from Greenland, Ottawa is showing it can provide continuity where Washington injects chaos. The divergence became even clearer with Trump's July 2025 trade deal with the European Union. A 15% tariff framework, billions in US energy commitments, and a flashy handshake in Scotland grabbed global headlines. Canada, however, wasn't mentioned once. For Trump, the EU offered optics and scale, something Canada, already embedded in US supply chains, couldn't replicate. But Ottawa isn't rushing. Prime Minister Mark Carney has made it clear Canada will only sign a deal that works long-term. Instead of scrambling for relief, Canada is preparing for the 2026 USMCA review, a chance to reshape the entire framework. In the meantime, Canada is strengthening ties with Mexico, exploring new corridors with Asia, and investing heavily at home. GDP growth has slowed, but not collapsed. Boycotts of US goods are holding, and Canadian exporters are already diversifying away from US buyers. Meanwhile, the US faces growing backlash. In just 4 months, tariff-related disruptions have cost American manufacturers between 30,000 and 40,000 jobs. Automakers like GM and Ford report losses in the billions. Retailers from Walmart to Best Buy are quietly raising prices, and ordinary families are beginning to notice. Every purchase, from shampoo to sneakers, carries a hidden tariff premium. This is the paradox of Trump's trade war. Designed to show strength, it is exposing weakness. Designed to punish rivals, it is empowering neighbors. And designed to protect American households, it is forcing them to pay more at every turn. Canada, by contrast, is playing the long game. By resisting quick deals, building new alliances, and focusing on resilience, Ottawa is proving that patience, quiet, deliberate, strategic, can be more powerful than bluster. Whether in the morning cup of coffee or in the minerals beneath Greenland, the future of North American trade may be defined less by Trump's deadlines than by Carney's endurance.